Chapter 1 is all about the shift of educational focus from content to learning outcomes. The learning outcomes of these chapters are: students will be able to explain at least 3 characteristics of outcomes-based education. They can distinguish among institutional outcomes, program outcomes, course outcomes, and learning instructional outcomes. Students will be able to formulate learning outcomes based on given educational objectives. We'll go now to the introduction of this chapter. We know that, reduced to the barest components, the educative process happens between the teacher and the student. The word education comes from the term educare or educere. Educere means to draw out. In the old belief that education is a pouring in process, mostly it focused on instruction that was content and subject matter. And everybody believed that when education is completed, we can call ourselves already what? Educated. But in the modern times, technology changed the perspective in education. That's why today, we have already the outcomes-based education, what we called OBE. There are 3 characteristics of OBE. OBE is student-centered, faculty-driven, and OBE is meaningful. The student-centered. OBE is focusing on student learning outcomes. We call it SLO. While here, OBE encourages teaching responsibility also, assessing program outcomes, and motivating students' participation. OBE is meaningful. It provides data to guide the teacher in making valid, continuing improvement in instruction and assessment activities. So let's go now to the implementing OBE procedure. Number 1, identification of the educational objectives of the subject or course. Educational objectives should be broad goals to achieve, and educational objectives are defining in general terms like KSA, K, knowledge, S, skill, and A, attitude, something to attain. It should be stated from the point of view of the teacher, such as to develop, to provide, to enhance, to inculcate, and others. Number 2, listing of learning outcomes is specified for each subject course objective. And we are going to use the Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy of objectives. Like we have cognitive. Cognitive belongs to what? Knowledge. We have these terms: remembering, applying, analyzing, evaluating, synthesizing, and creating. And then under psychomotor also, it talks about skills. These are the manual and physical skills. We can have these terms: observing, imitating, practicing, adapting, and innovating. While affective is all about attitude. It talks about receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and internalizing. Implementing OBE procedure number 3, drafting outcomes assessment procedure. It means the outcomes assessment procedure. It will determine the degree to which the students are attaining desired learning outcomes. It identifies the data which guides the selection of assessment tools and what point it will be done. The outcomes of education. There are 2 types of outcomes. One is immediate outcomes, and the second is deferred outcomes. Let's talk about immediate outcomes. These are competencies, skills acquired upon completion of the subject. Okay, what you have learned maybe from PC 213, you have learned values from fellow 101 ethics. Those are immediate outcomes of the subject. Then, a grade level. Once you have finished maybe your grade 6, then you have finished it, then you can go to the next level. Grade 7, grade 8, like that. Then the next, it is a segment of the program or the program itself. What you have learned from the program or the program itself, that is what we call immediate outcomes. Example of immediate outcomes. Number 1, the ability to communicate in writing and speaking. Next, mathematical problem-solving skill. Next, skill in identifying objects with the use of different senses. Next, the ability to produce artistic or literary works. Next, skill in storytelling. Other one, passing required licensure examination. Those are what we call immediate outcomes. Deferred outcomes. The ability to apply cognitive, psychomotor, and affective skills in various situations many years after completion of the subject, grade level, or degree program is what we call deferred outcomes. Examples: success in professional practice or occupation. Like you, when you're going to graduate, then you can land a job, and then you can use everything that you have learned in your college days. That's what we call deferred outcomes. Promotion in a job, okay? Success in career planning, health, and wellness. What you have learned maybe from your PE, what you have learned from your value subjects, and other subjects, then you can apply it in your life after you graduate or throughout your life. Then we can have awards and recognition. Those are examples of deferred outcomes. Institutional, program, course, and learning outcomes. OBE comes from different levels. Started from the institution. We called it institutional outcomes. Also in the program or program outcomes. In the course outcomes, and learning instruction or learning outcomes. Institutional outcomes. What the graduates of an educational institutions are able to do beyond graduation is the concern of this institutional outcomes. We know that in UC we have monitoring of our graduates. We are monitoring if our graduates have landed jobs and others. That is the purpose of institutional outcomes. Program outcomes. What the graduate of particular degree are able to do after graduation. Like for example, our graduates here in education or B.Ed or BSed, we are monitoring them every now and then if they have passed the board exam, if they have landed jobs. That's part of the program outcomes. Next, course outcomes. What students be able to demonstrate at the end of the subject is what we call course outcomes. Like you have finished PC 200, you have finished Fellow 101. What you have learned from those subjects can be called the course outcomes. Learning outcomes. What the students are supposed to demonstrate after the instruction, like today, in our subject, is what we call learning outcomes. Instead of writing the learning objectives, most of the books are writing it learning outcomes based on OBE. Okay, let's go now to learning objectives and learning outcomes. What are objectives? Objectives are statements that define the expected goal or goals of an educational activity. Objectives are used to structure the content of an educational activity. It includes tasks such as list, discuss, or state. While outcomes are what the learner will be able to do as a result of participating in educational activity. Outcomes also address the educational needs, knowledge, skills, and practices. Outcomes assess the overall impact of multiple objectives. Examples of learning objectives and learning outcomes. Let's go on to objectives. Student will understand fundamental principles, generalizations, or theories. Second, students will learn factual knowledge, terminology, classification, methods, and trends. Students will think about applications of course material to improve thinking, problem solving, and decisions. Students will have an appreciation of related application to real life of the theories they learn. Students will study the major U.S. regulatory agencies. These are examples of objectives. Let's go now to the examples of outcomes. Students will identify, formulate, and solve integrative chemistry problems. That's the subject chemistry. The students will be able to build probability models to quantify risks of an insurance system and use data and technology to make appropriate statistical inferences. Subject is actuarial science. Students will be able to use basic vector, raster, 3D design, video, and web technologies in the creation of works of art. This belongs to art subject. Next, apply differential calculus to modern rates of change in time of physical and biological phenomena. It is in mathematics. Then, calculate the magnitude and direction of magnetic fields created by moving electric charges. Outcomes for physics. If you are going to compare between objectives and outcomes, the terms mostly used in objectives are broad. Okay, sometimes it is not measurable. While in the outcomes, the terms used are very specific that you can see or you can really measure and you can observe this one while you are having your class. And that's all for today. Thank you.